As the Church begins to listen to the native people of our country, we learn about the mistakes of our own past. Yet our native brothers and sisters have not let bitterness shape all our interaction with each other. Tonight, Pressure Point presents an interview with Ray Jones, a hereditary chief from the village of Kitsigukla near Hazelton in northern BC.
My name is Alvin Dixon, and I'm a conference staff person responsible for Native Ministries in BC Conference, United Church of Canada. And with me is Ray Jones from the village of Kitsigukla on the Skeena River. Could you tell us a little bit about who Ray Jones is, what his education is, where he went to school and for how long, and a little bit about the political activity in the village?
Thank you, Alvin. As far as education went, I took grade 1 to grade 5 in Kitsigukla Indian Day School. And grade 6, for some reason or another, I was sent to Edmonton Indian Residential School. And I hated it so much, and I begged and pleaded. And my parents begged and pleaded. And I was fortunate to take grade 7 and 8 back in Kitsigukla. And after grade 8 in Kitsigukla, I had really nowhere to go. Yeah, I was kind of in a quandary, not only myself, there were a number of other people in this area, once after grade 8 in an Indian Day School. So there was only myself and another lady, and the government felt that it would be too expensive for us to be using a cab back and forth to Hazelton. So I had a choice between Alberni Residential School to go back to, or Edmonton Residential School, or drop out of school. So I took Alberni, no, pardon me, I took Edmonton because I knew some people there when I was in grade 6 there. So I went back there and I completed my high school there. And I took a year of college right in Edmonton, Alberta College. And from there, I kind of went into different types of work, construction, things like that. And lo and behold, I was asked by my parents to look after their old house while they went on holiday, which is their first real holiday they ever had in their life. So within that 2-week period, I got elected to the Kitsigukla Band Council as a council member. And ever since...
How old were you then?
I was just pushing 22. And ever since then I've been involved, and from there politically I got asked to be involved with some elderly people of the fall of '68 who were being harassed by the fisheries department because of their nets out in Cedarvale and also in Morristown. And through those activities, the Gitxan Carrier Travel Council evolved. It was really a lot of fun. We were fighting for basic rights, which is a place to live, and our eternal and always our rights, which is to pursue and to harvest our own resources, to upkeep our survival. And from there, the fall of '68, we had a very, very, very hot and beautiful meeting in Gittin Max in the old hall there.
Gittin Max is where?
Hazelton. That's Gittin Max is the Indian name for old Hazelton. And from there we decided to get into a tribal council system. And at that time, the basis of the tribal council system was to work towards the common needs of our respective villages within the area, which are 8 villages. There are 6 that are Gitxsan and 2 are Carrier, Hagelget and Morristown. And from there, the Gitxsan Carrier Tribal Council evolved, and only recently the name has been changed from Gitxsan to Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en, which for respect to the Wet'suwet'en people, they themselves have asked that, and that means the people of, within their own respective language, I believe. I could be corrected here. But as far as...
the change in name stemmed from, as I understand it, the fact that the Carrier tribes exist or live farther east, except for these 2 remote western villages?
The Carrier people basically are from Williams Lake, and they expand a little bit west of Williams Lake, and they go north, and they go all the way to the Alberta border, and a little bit north of Prince George and to the Tachi area, and again narrow down to Burns Lake, and kind of single down to Morristown and Hagelget. And Hagelget is right on the edge of the Gitxsan territory in the Hagelget Canyon.
So really the original name of Gitxsan Carrier sort of suggested that there were far more people in the council tribal than there were, so you decided to properly identify those people who were actual members of the tribal council as Wet'suwet'en?
Yes, it was Wet'suwet'en, I believe, and I can be corrected again, is that it identifies those 2 specific Carrier villages. The Carrier here means the specific language, So Wet'suwet'en identifies the Hagelget people and the Morristown people.
I want to go back and ask about your education. You mentioned leaving the village and going to a residential school, and you had a choice between Alberni and Edmonton. I know that Alberni Indian Residential School, it was a United Church school. Was the Edmonton school United Church?
Edmonton was operated, administrated by United Church, with Department of Indian Affairs, or Department of Immigration, would you believe? Dollars at that time. And it was definitely United Church. And a lot of the people, I say people now because we've grown up and we're adults, and a lot of us are lucky to be leaders within our respective areas. And a lot of the people came from Nass River, which is normally Anglican church, but they nevertheless came to Edmonton, and we all went to school together. And it was a church-run school with Indian Affairs, administrated dollars, Indian Affairs, again, I like to repeat this, through the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. I remember one time one of our ministers was Helen Fertlow. She's a lovely lady, very lovely lady. But unfortunately, being one of the leading women within her period, she really never did have that acceptance amongst the male cabinet ministers of John Diefenbaker in those days, So maybe this is why her particular ministership was quite weak, but we're just drifting off the topic here. But then again, these are things I recall from, those days. And living in a residential school means you have to be prim and proper, abide by the rules, don't speak your language. But fortunately for guys like myself and a few other guys from Hazelton, which is Gittinmax, as I said previously, we used to go out in the bush, go hunting rabbits, and shooting a lot of rabbits, and it really substantiated our diet in the residential school, really. That's another thing. But while we were out there, we used our own language amongst ourselves with no fear of anybody squealing on us, that we're using our own language. This is one factor of Indian residential school. it worked on the weaknesses of people around you. That's how it worked. The residential school rigid system worked on the people around you who were weak. And once their weaknesses were exposed, the authorities of the residential school took advantage of that. And if you had any rebellious, which cannot be considered rebellious, or any creative thoughts at all, or any thoughts or expressions that are not norm to the prim and proper church upbringing, you're constantly watched. And when caught, you're punished accordingly. And punishment can be quite severe, especially at that period when quite a few of us, well, some of my older colleagues were in a period where they're maturing into young people, young women, young men, and in a surrounding like a residential school, it's girls on one side, boys on one side, and in a dining room, girls on one side, boys on one side. Naturally, your inner libido, does not stop where the churches and the Department of Indian Affairs tells you to stop. So there's always that strong attraction to the opposite sex, not only because they're the opposite sex, but because they were friends. They were there in a common bondage, to put it lightly, common bondage, and all supposedly for the good of the church and the Department of Indian Affairs. And from there we'd come out educated and ready to take our place in the mainstream society, which unfortunately was not always the case, because just standing right here, I can think about 3 or 4 people that committed suicide in the 6 years I spent in residential school.
While they were at the residential school?
One we cannot say for sure, but the other 5 I know shortly thereafter. And I know it stemmed from the rigidness of the rules, and which you had to abide by. And I think especially one of them happened to be a real good friend of mine, who was one of the people that after midnight, him and I, our beds were close together, and we can whisper to each other in our own language. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's really funny. I mean, it's not funny, it's the reaction, anything that the authorities therein of a residential school, we automatically had to rebel it, or we had to do something else. We had to be ourselves, and we can't express ourselves there. We weren't ourselves. We were forced to get up in the morning, forced to eat the breakfast, forced to jump on a bus to go to school, come back, then forced to eat supper, and forced to go to study. The only time we were free was when we come back home in British Columbia in the summertime, and if we were free and if we were lucky enough. There are a lot of kids that weren't as lucky and had to stay and spend the whole summer in the residential school and go out to their camps and whatever it is that they go to,
You mentioned that some children were forced to stay at the residential school rather than go home to their respective villages. What conditions existed that made it imperative that they stay in the school? Was it no home, no parents, or no money to transport them back to their homes? Why did they stay?
From my experience and what through my friends, it is strictly, number one, parental separation. Number 2, grandparents on both maternal and fraternal side of the families did not want to take these people back for the summer because they went away, they've gone, and to the grandparents, a lot of them felt that these people have no longer existed within their own rightful Indian society, which is quite a traumatic experience to learn from people. You know, it's very traumatic for people who already have a very delicate parental background or no parental background at all. So those are some of the conditions, and other conditions are such that, you know, the very odd case where you can stay for the summer if you want.
I don't want to dwell too long on the issue of the United Church and residential schools, but I note that you didn't mention anything about the teaching of religion or the practice of worship at residential school, and whether or not that affected your attendance at churches when you left the school.
Well, I guess it's common knowledge around here that despite the fact that I'm vice president of our local church board, but it never leaves my mind that personally I'm not ready to go to church till sometime in April 1991, because during my residential school years we were forced to go to church 4 times a Sunday, and sometimes 5. It depends on how many student ministers are around the Edmonton area at that particular time. So I used to calculate, you know, I used to add all this up. So when I graduated and when I left Edmonton Residential School, I figured out that I don't have to go to church, you know, based on the common non-native church-going system, which is once a Sunday. I don't have to go to church till sometime April 1991. But yeah, things change. My heart mellows as I grow older. And also, my mom and dad were very, very active in the United Church. And one of the biggest disappointments in my life was not only when my dad died, but when he died, there was no United Church minister around to bury him. I'll never forget that. It was 1 week after the first moonwalk by Norm Armstrong. And I got a person from another denomination to bury my dad because everybody from United Church was on holidays for some reason or another. And it always hurts me to this day. And I guess that's why I don't frequent the church that much. But then again, I'm mellowed a bit, and I am going in there now, hopefully, to try and express to the non-native factor of the United Church that we as Native people do have spirituality. And that spirituality may be common to the native, non-native person, but it's just different nomenclature, that's all. You know, that spirituality, you know, is a common bond. We live in a society today where racism is always on a very, very explosive level. And South Africa is one example. But in the BC Northwest, in our local weekly periodicals, more and more I notice racial incitement in the articles or columns that are written in there. But so, this is maybe one reason why I have decided to mellow a bit and go back to the church, because of the common bondage. We all believe in a God, and we know there is a God, and nobody can escape that. The Muslims call him Allah, you know. Some people call it karma, but it's a common bondage. And I think the church itself nowadays has also shifted in a manner where it's listening, especially to the native minority, listen to the native minority of what spirituality really means, what church really means, who God is, what God is all about.
This property that we stand on is not within the boundaries of the Gitsigutla Reserve, but I know that you own it. There are 40 acres. You pay taxes on it. Could you tell us why that is?
It goes across here, and there's a little bare strip across the river here that's non-reserve, and yet it's all surrounded by reserve across the river. And the same thing here is, you know, the reserve surrounds that. And my dad told me to take over this property when I was 16 years old. He says, you start paying the taxes on it. And at that time, not to give away my age, but it was $2.57. I never forget my first tax bill. And I thought my dad was so generous of him to let me have this, you know, to pay this a year. But today, it's a different story. We're looking at $250, $300 a year. And we really don't get the kind of benefits that we should be getting for it.
I wanted to mention, or have you mention that, because this 40-acre piece of property probably is within the larger piece of property that the land claims discussants describe as the overall land claims of the Gitsigutla or Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en people.
Well, this specific area, and right up the height of land, and right in there, and you can look to my left, straight in there where the sun is, look like it's setting, is the Gitsigutla Valley, and that is the main area of the Gitsigutla land claims question. There are a lot of trap lines there, hunting areas, you know, and in our land question, everything is judged by the height of land, and there's no specific definition of a given area, but nevertheless, every little small area, every little creek, every little hump has a specific name of which it's to be identified. And this is how we identify our territory from another clan whose territory might be next to ours, so that we do not go over that border without their permission. We always have to have permission to go onto another person's or another clan's border.
So what you're really saying in the land claims, the land claim that you're making against the federal and provincial governments is that the Gitsigutla people had property or lands that was uninterrupted from one end to the other by other owners, or chunks of land between one end of the boundary to the other. It was all Gitsigutla property. How large might that property have been if it were described properly at the beginning as Gitsigutla Reserve in one piece?
I really cannot give you an exact area, but the whole Gitxsan carrier land question encompasses 22,000 square miles. And the Gitsigutla portion is very hard. We're still, you know, the land claims office is working on more specific, isolated name and area of which specific lands belong to.
What species of fish, salmon, swim and spawn in the Skeena system?
Well, first of all, in the early spring, we have our spring salmon. We have our spring salmon, And we have a steelhead that come back and forth. Sockeye is a very big run in the Skeena, you know, as well as the Fraser. Coho, pink salmon, chum, jacks, rainbow trout, which is steelhead.
Do you have free access to harvest in the river when you need to replenish your food supply?
Unfortunately, the way the laws are, and they're non-native laws, we cannot, at our whim, harvest. For an example, steelhead in the middle of April, or the middle of November, for that matter, or in January. And that is the only species running during that period. We cannot harvest that because the laws, the non-native laws say we can't. So we do not have free access to it in respect to Canada's laws in fishery conservation.
When you are allowed to harvest salmon, are you allowed to harvest as many as you want, or do you have a quota?
Well, I think when you harvest salmon, like anything else that we harvest, game, wild game, we harvest it to the extent of our needs. And if our needs means 1,000 pieces of sockeye, so be it. We have extended families. And not only that, through our extended families, we have other people that, that need that salmon this day and age. And I hate to sound political, but when you look at the activities around us in relation to what our government is doing, we have to look at our non-native friends who are not free to harvest the salmon, which is ours to begin with anyway, because we're from this land. But we have to look at them, they're our friends, and we've got to help them out too, because our present government, both provincial and federal, are not helping these people. So, like I say, if we need 1,000 salmon per capita, 1,000 sockeye, so be it. But if we need 5 sockeye, so be it. That's the individual. Mm-hmm. There are other people, there are other native people around here that may not have as many relatives, may not have as many friends who are in need. Salmon is nature's resource, which we have respected through all these generations, and we should not be restricted in such a manner where we almost have to beg for a permit to go and harvest it when God, nature, has already provided it to us.
I would like to thank you, Ray, for talking with us, and you've given us some insight into some aspects of land claims.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alvin.